Welcome to episode 3 of the AWMD podcast, where today we're going to be talking about managing children's emotions.
Yeah, I've got a lot of experience with that.
The best way, hit them with a frying pan, a big cast iron one.
Please no. No, I mean like having been married to you, I've got a lot of experience with
Yeah.
managing kids' emotions.
I've got a big emotion.
Just
Example of big emotions.
blooper number 2 of the day.
Right. So what was it you got to talk about today? What are you gonna yip about today? My IQ's taken.
I'm his IQ. It's
My IQ's taken a break. It's been a busy day, so my better half is going to be talking mostly today. So take the coffee, get a Red Bull. There won't be as many jokes.
There won't be as many jokes. Thanks, babe. So today I suppose we're going to talk about like how, as a parent who wants to raise their children morally and to be well-rounded humans, but without, having to overly discipline previous generations, which I think they have done.
Cast iron frying pan.
Yeah. How do you help them learn and manage their emotions?
It's a very good question because actually, challenging thought is most adults don't know how to manage their emotions, which is, the kind of hard truth for a lot of people that even for me personally, it was only what really past sort of 6 years that I started to learn how to manage and deal with emotions. So I think one of the biggest things when trying to understand emotions is to understand this really pivotal point. Children copy their parents. If not their parents, their primary caregiver, or whatever adults or bigger people they spend most of their time with. So bigger people could be siblings, bigger people could be nursery teachers, it could be other children in school, the older school kids, the cool kids, whatever it is, that is where most children will learn.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so important to first and foremost, as an adult or a parent, to first learn how to regulate your own emotions. Because, boy, when kids kick off, it gets tough.
It does.
And if you cannot regulate your own emotions well, then it's just going to be this sort of avalanche snowball effect.
Yeah, and that's kind of, so when we're thinking of big emotions for children, that's exactly what we're thinking of, like those, the physical manifestation of that is going to be like tantrums, screaming, kicking, throwing, hitting, sometimes biting, some kids bite, stomping feet, some kids run away and hide. Like that's also a way that kids, and it's that inability that they feel to cope with a situation, and it's often more times than not through intense anger or sadness, and that's kind of the manifestations of the behaviors that you see.
I had a good one earlier with Ellie actually. Was preparing lunch and then she did all the good cut. She was very good with, no, don't put all the manky cucumber in your bowl. We'll put it here for the hens and blah blah. She was very good with all of that. And then it was time to get onto the spinner.
Yeah.
To spin the lettuce. So, I then did the first bit and I gave it to her, and she's then spinning away while I'm preparing the rest of the lunch and setting the table. And it's like, okay, Ellie, spinner's all done now. Time to go eat. She doesn't want to hand over the lettuce because she's having a lot of fun spinning
She
it.
loves the spinner.
And I say, okay, Ellie, you can have one more spin and then Papa's going to take it. She does her last spin, Papa takes it. She doesn't want to let me take it. So she's like, no, and I take it, I just get on with life. And then she then smacks her learning tower, like full on wallops it, gets upset. And I ignore the tantrum because she's been going through this phase recently where she's been hitting out when she's not been getting her way. And I just ignore it. I go set things on the table, then she runs after me. And I just go down and give her a hug. And then she climbs up on my leg, has a big huggy, and then she says, Papa, put on chair. And I put her on the chair, and then we then spoke about it, but she was very happy. But in that situation, you could have ended up trying to fight fire with fire. Whereas you realize the child does not yet know how to manage their emotion because she's less than 2. And if me, as when I was like 28, didn't know how to manage my emotions, how much more can I expect a 2-year-old?
Yeah.
You then have to go, okay, you have to understand that you have to learn when to respond versus not to respond. Like, you didn't hit a human, you hit the learning tower. It's okay. That would have hurt you more than the learning tower. she realized straight away it was wrong because she got sad and ran after me.
Yeah.
And she just didn't know how to regulate at that time.
Yeah, and that's, of course, that's correct, because when you think about like child development, they're obviously still learning how to manage their emotions. And so, our daughter is nearly two. Nearly there. Soon, couple weeks. But, she's pretty good for her age at managing emotions. But typically children between the ages of like 2 and 7, they're still developing, and their prefrontal lobe is still developing, and they're still learning how to just even process emotions and like what it means. And so as you sort of as a child develops and as they grow older, 7 up to about 12, and then after that you've then got like those lovely pubescent years. Their brains are still developing, and so between 7 and 12, that's kind of the peak emotional IQ time, where they're developing in their amygdala, where they're developing their prefrontal cortex. And then as they get older again, their prefrontal cortex continues to develop. Even into our 20s, we continue to develop our ability to rationalize and logic and to process emotion and deal with it. And so when you understand that, you have to have grace to see, like, these kids just don't know, they're not trying to be naughty, they're not trying to annoy you, they're not trying to frustrate you, which it can feel like so many times. Not just as a parent, but even as a therapist, it's the first thing I teach my staff is like, when a kid's having a challenging behavior, they are not victimizing you. It's not because they don't like you. It's not because they are trying to attack you.
Well, there were some kids.
There's a few.
There's some genuine terrorists out there.
But like, it's not for that reason. It's not that you've even really done something wrong. It's just that they're learning. They're just learning. And we had to learn at one point in our life. And so it's giving them the grace, and then giving them the tools as their brain and as their body develops, to then help that process and help that development.
Yeah, and it's kind of understanding this really important sort of analogy, or simple analogies, that as things are being built, it never works well. There's always misfiring, there's always issues that are coming up in building phases. But the same thing in the human brain, that as the human brain develops, the body or the mouth, whatever parts, are not going to regulate well, because there are still synapses being formed between the brain cells, between different parts of the brain, and there'll sometimes be misfiring where one part of the brain does a part the other part of the brain's meant to do. And it's all the process of the brain starting to develop and regulate. And if parents don't understand that, it's very hard to then have grace.
Yeah.
So sometimes remembering that simple analogy of, hey, they're still growing, they're still learning, and because of that you need to have some grace. They're not where you are. You would have been there one day yourself.
Yeah. And they literally can't understand, it's so, the smallest things can be so overwhelming for these kids. And so on that note, when was the last time your child had or experienced big emotions, and what did that look like? Drop a comment and let us know. Share your experiences.
Yeah, and share as well how you felt like you rode through that big emotion. Kind of like how I shared about Ellie with her lunch. It's always interesting to read other people's strategies, because sometimes you yourself will get a bit of wisdom or an idea that you can do yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So I think one interesting area to tackle and to talk about, which I definitely find interesting, is how the West versus East differs in their approach to helping children with their emotional development.
Normally, the biggest difference between the two that people don't realize is it's a different time zone.
Seriously. Now we need tumbleweed.
That was a good one. Because in China it's like 12 a.m. and then in like America it's like...
Are you trying to save that joke? I feel like that was a dad joke. You're getting ready for number 2.
Trying to save it.
Getting your dad jokes on point.
I think the biggest difference, different viewpoints will have different opinions, but I think the majority of people listening to this would probably agree that the East has done it better than the West in the past sort of 20 years in terms of societal construct, where there's a lot more respect from Eastern raised children, Eastern raised human beings tend to be harder workers, tend to be more respectful, tend to be more honorable, tend to be more reliable, tend to be a male and a female if they're a male and a female.
Not a he, she, they, them, cat.
Or demon. So, you know, when you then understand that, if you look at the overall society, and you can just keep it really simple, like Russia versus America, you can say which society looks healthier.
From all perspectives, arguably.
Russia,
but yeah.
yeah, for, you know, by also Russia, you know, their people are
Yeah.
healthier, they're less obese, they are better educated, they're better skilled, they are healthier, better agriculture, better manners, better respect, kind of better everything. So you'd have to go, okay, what's the main difference between the two systems then in how children are raised?
Well, I think that in the West, especially in the more recent years, it's been very prevalent that they promote from a child like individuality and sort of promote freedom of expression and freedom of speech, which, don't get me wrong, it's not necessarily inherently all bad, but it's that kind of focus on validating your emotions, how you're feeling, how you're seeing the world, which arguably has led to a lot of issues, but it's kind of feeding selfishness and like a self-focus rather than any kind of thought or care for anyone around them. And I think that the East tends to promote, in terms of like a child development, they'll tend to promote, as you've very much said, like more politeness, more respect, more manners, thinking about the community, because, you know, in East it is more community, tribal, villages, and they try to think about, you know, the whole system rather than just that one individual person. And it creates much more of like a harmony and a harmonious environment where, you know, you're each just trying to serve and think of the other, put the other person above yourself rather than thinking like, I need, I want, I feel. You're thinking about, well, how do they feel? How do they look? And, you know, even as an adult, like we're unlearning what the West taught us like this. And the West raises us very self-focused, very self-centered.
You consider, let's just use, you know, UK schooling systems from the age of sort of 16, you're pressed, what do you want to do for your education, for your career? There's no concept of what is needed, what is required, what the state needs, or even what your family needs. Whereas if you go back not that long ago, maybe 100, 150 years ago, everything about having a family was about making the family do better.
Yeah.
Whatever the family trade, the family, it was just to expand into what it was the family did to further the family. And that's why people had so many kids, because the more kids you had, the more people you had to further your family house, to further what your house did. And
help you with the house chores.
Help with the house chores, help with the baking, help with the cooking, help with the farming, help with the family business, whatever it is. And that created a different society. There was a lot more charity, there was a lot more good works being done, there was a lot more sharing.
Yep.
There was communities. Whereas this whole do what you want to do has bred this it's all about me mindset, which has resulted in a destruction in Western society.
Yeah, I mean, you look at recent years and what's happened in America, where you've got, you know, kids who are deciding they want to be a cat at the age of 4 and they want to live their lives as a cat because they're not having anyone help them regulate their emotions, their logic and their rationale. They're just told, think what you want, feel what you want, do what you want.
And it's you know, it's the problem with then not putting boundaries. If there's then no boundaries, how can you regulate?
Of course.
But the rules of regulation means there is a good, there is a bad, there is a beginning, there is an end, there's a yes, there's a no.
Yeah.
If you look at the Western approach where there's just do what you want, there is an inability to regulate, which then creates a whole chain of events.
And you're ultimately, I mean, if you then look at the long-term prospects of that in that society, you're teaching from a child that they're going to eventually grow up, obviously, to be a teenager, an adult, maybe one day get married, maybe one day have their own kids. And you see it starting to emerge in the younger generations that are having children now who have been brought up in that society. that they don't know how to raise a child.
Okay.
They don't know how to love their spouse. That's why divorce is so prevalent, because it's about me, my feelings.
Okay.
I don't like this marriage anymore. My husband doesn't do that for me, or my wife doesn't treat me nice enough, and oh, my child is being a problem for me, or whatever it is. And they don't, that it's about them. It's about me, my feelings. My feelings have to be validated, rather than what can I do to help honor my spouse? What can I do to help my child in this moment? And it just becomes messy, that the family structure just falls apart because you put that as a seed into a child. You're growing something that is not going to be productive or life-giving.
Yeah, so when you stop and think about it, really important things then parents can put in practice is understanding, in order to regulate emotions, there has to be rules.
Yes, there have to be boundaries. It's essential.
You cannot create regulation without rules. And it's setting as a family what are non-negotiable rules. For example, for us, hitting is a no. You do not hit out of emotion.
Of course.
And that's it. There is no hitting out of emotion. It's not allowed. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And that's it. And therefore, if a child hits out of frustration and emotion, which Eddie has done, us and Pablo, it's teaching. Yeah, boys, the Pablo can be a terrorist, but and it's understanding to teach that by being an example. So she sees how we act, and then she can then act accordingly as you guide her through that process.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important thing. Is you have to give children tools. You can't just simply, of course, rules are important. This is a negotiable, this is a non-negotiable, this is allowed, this is never going to be allowed. And of course you have to have that, but you have to then give them strategies and tools in those emotions to process it in an acceptable way, because you can't simply punish the emotion. You can't simply just say, you're angry and you hit, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that, because you're never leaving a space for them to understand how to process the emotion. And all that leads to is adults who have suppressed all their emotions, and then they become very angry people.
Right.
Covertly, that's the word I'm looking for, covertly, when they're adults, because they've never learned how to process. And so you have to provide tools to teach and to guide them through an appropriate way to manage their emotions.
So what tools can you then give or use with a kid to help them manage their emotions?
So I think one of the ones, I don't particularly like the name that's given to it nowadays, but it's again a very rooted in the East practice of mindfulness. And it's just essentially drawing the person away from that immediate overwhelming emotion and back into like the present reality and into their body of what's going on, and focusing on what's going on. And so there's a lot of things we implement with Ellie that we've done literally since she was a few months old. I think we did them even when she started kind of like slithering around and whatever, when she was we did from even a few months old. We were teaching them. And like one of the ones, and you can speak more into how this works, but one of the techniques that I love using with Ellie is breathing and modeling that, like, let's take a deep breath. And why does that help?
Yeah, so when what Danielle used to, and she was better at it than me, I would never do. I'd be like, I ain't got time for this. I'm trying to make sure I don't snap. It was just modeling deep breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth.
Yeah.
And then Ellie would then naturally start to try and copy that. And when you then focus on deep breathing, it helps balance your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So it can help pull you out of your fight and flight response.
Yeah.
When your stress system or your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, your heart rate will naturally elevate, your breathing will naturally get shorter, you'll start doing more mouth breathing because it's a perceived time of threat. Whereas when you then focus mindfully to then focus on in through your nose, out through your mouth, slow, deep, controlled breaths, that will naturally force your brain and kickstart your brain to then reactivate your parasympathetic nervous system, which can start to lower your heart rate, start to bring down cortisol, and start to put you in a mental state to start being rational and logical.
And I think what you said at the beginning is key, because when we started this with Ellie, I didn't even necessarily vocally tell her, breathe like me or do a deep breath. Like, I just modeled it, and I just, kind of sit opposite her, and I would hold her and I would just model, and children naturally imitate. So you can start this, even like, I think Ellie really was about 6 to 9 months,
like that.
very young. And we started so young, and it shows now because her emotional intelligence is through the roof. And so, just modeling what you want them to do. And as they get older, of course, you can communicate. Like now I start telling her, like, come on, let's try and take a deep breath. But just the modeling.
One of the biggest things with modeling as well, so I kept telling you off about it, is not to flap. When things,
She was first born, I
yeah,
flapped all the
when
time.
things go wrong in parenting,
That time where she vomited and
yeah, the
diarrhea
child
and
is not in a
peed everywhere.
cognitive state as to what's going on. You as the adult are, they are flapping like a chicken in the wind. You have to not flap. You have to be the calm energy. You've got
Yeah.
to be the root. You've got to be the tree, the anchor point the child can be drawn to.
That's true.
The biggest mistake parents do is they flap with their kid. So you end up being two headless chickens flapping about, bouncing off each other. And they literally do, headless chickens do bounce off each other like headless chickens, just doing all sorts of nonsense.
Yeah, it's true.
And it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help your child learn to regulate. But when something is going a bit Pete-tong, a bit wrong, if you are the grounding energy, if you are calm and centered and you don't start flapping, it will help calm the situation and help your child be able to regulate. That's why with lunchtime, instead of me dealing with the situation, I was just calm, got on with the task, and that allowed for her to very quickly regulate, calm down, and get back to a normal state to then deal with the situation, you know?
Yeah, and so a few other techniques as well is, grounding and doing that daily with children is a good thing, and even for us as adults. What are the best ways that we can do that, especially like in Dubai?
Simple things, it's just going to the parks, being barefoot, going out in the beach, go to the ocean, just get outdoors in the sun, get some fresh air. Just being exposed to nature will naturally help the human body regulate through responses to the sun, to responses to the feeling of grass on your feet. These are all things that help your nervous systems regulate.
Nice.
And they're very good things for kids to do. If their kids are a bit skitty, probably because they haven't actually been spending any time outdoors. Kids aren't meant to be indoors. They're meant to be wild savages out in the wild, kind of just surviving if they can. And that's it's how kids are meant to be. So this whole stay indoors, sit at a table is not right. It does create dysregulation, dysemotion. I mean, one of the biggest important things for regulating emotions for brains for children is this key thing that parents haven't allowed to happen. They haven't let their children be bored. Bored. It's a genuine, people don't know this, but if a child by the age of 2 has not learned how to be bored, they cannot regulate emotion correctly because the brain has not developed correctly. By the age of 2, children have to learn to be bored.
We used to put Ellie in her bouncer when she was quite young and just face her out looking at the window outside when she could. Just give her a couple, not long. And again, I would use some ABA techniques where I would preempt her signs of I'm about to
get upset,
and you'd intervene before they get upset, and then you'd reward them for their alone time, so to speak. And we used to do that.
And it's simple things like when they wake up, not rushing straight to them.
Oh yeah, Ellie's very good now with she's just chilling
lying in bed and just playing with her teddies, just won't get out of bed. And it's because it's a skill which must be developed before the age of 2. And it in part kicks in as part of sleep training, because as part of sleep training you don't get them up until the right time, irrespective of how long they stay in their bed. And that's times when they will learn to be bored. Or in today's world, you're going for a drive, you don't need to have a TV in front of them. They can sit there and be bored and look out the window like everyone else did until recently.
Yeah, he's very good with that.
And those are very important skills. Like if a child has not learnt those by the age of 2, emotional regulation is very hard. And as your child gets older, it's still a skill you must teach them. And that is one of the most important steps for children, adults, to learn how to regulate their emotions correctly. You must be able to sit there and just be bored. You must be able to sit there and just look out a window and do nothing. If you can't do that, that's a huge missing piece of the brain balance for healthy regulation of your emotions. So it's an important thing to remember as part of parenting. And also another very good top tip for parents as part of helping children regulate their emotions is, are they getting sufficient movement and sufficient high activity movement? Walking around the mall is not sufficient high activity movement. They've got to do bouncing, they've got to do run, they've got to do sprinting, they've got to do jumping, they've got to do all of this silly stuff because it helps with regulating endorphins, dopamine, serotonin. All of these feel-good hormones all get moved as part of exercise, bouncing around, being silly and having fun. And all of these are needed in order to create a healthy ability for the brain and body to regulate emotional state. So when kids are being forced to sit in a pram and be quiet and just watch an iPad and watch this, it hasn't created the correct stimulus required in order for a healthy brain to develop.
Yeah, and it's why as well I think so many parents that I speak to and that I know their kids are in nursery or in, very, very little school, and the kids come home and, the teachers say, oh, my kid's an angel and the kid was great in school, and the kids come home and then the parents are like, my kid's possessed, what's going on, and they're having meltdowns and tantrums and this and that, and people talk about it, oh, and they I can't even remember the phrase that's been coined now, but it's like, oh, it's because you're the safe space for them, and so they bottle up, they basically mask their emotions while they're at nursery or while they're at school, and then when they come home they let all those emotions out at you. That's not necessarily true. It's actually more to do with the fact, as you've rightly said, they're being stuck indoors, they're being stuck at a table, stuck sitting on a circle time floor. They're not doing any movement. Kids have, sort of in the first few years up to sort of the age of 5 or 6, all of their learning should be movement and play based. It shouldn't be sat at a table. And so if they're not being given those opportunities, there's no opportunity to process emotions of the situations that are arising. And then they come home and they let it all out. Of course they will, because at home they have the freedom to then move around or to do these things.
Yeah, they're kind of like a jack in the box being tightened up all day. By the time they bring out, they're bouncing all over the place. So it's really important. And I think, for parents, stop and have a think and think about what resonates with you more. A Western approach, which is about individualization, or an Eastern approach, which is about consideration of all aspects of society or family. And then also then think, do you as a family encourage expression, or do you want to focus your children about self-restraint and self-regulation and restraint and learning how to manage one's emotion into a healthy state?
Yeah.
So have a think and just feel free to share and comment your thoughts below.
And I think it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think this is where finding the balance is key. Correct. Because you don't want to...
You go too far to the east, you're looking at communism. You go too fast to the west, you're looking at California. Is it California where they were really bad with the LGBTQ stuff?
I think it was. Yeah, I don't
know. Whatever.
But just to give an example of what we do and have done with Ellie, and it's, in those situations, let's say she lashes out, where she might be frustrated at something that, like literally today, wasn't it, with Pablo? Pablo was on his dog bed that she wanted to play with, and so she got mad at him because he was on the dog bed and she wanted to play with it. So she said, no, 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 no. And then she pushed him, and he's a very old dog. And I said, no, really, we don't push Pablo. I understand. And we explained the situation. I said, I understand. I can see you want to play with the dog bed. I can see you're frustrated by that. I can see that you want Pablo to move, but there's a way to do that, and that's not the correct way. Let's practice and let's try again. So I validated, I see how you're feeling. I understand it. It's okay to be frustrated. I understand what you need. I did also add in there, it is Pablo's bed, so if he doesn't want to share it with you, that's fine. But we then practiced, and it's an ABA technique, and it's positive practice. So you repeat the scenario and you do it again in an appropriate manner where they're able to then learn the correct skills. And so we then repeated it, and I spoke her through, and I said, okay, Ellie, well, here's what you can do. You can just say Pablo off. And if Pablo gets off, that was very kind, and he's willing to share his bed with you. If he doesn't, I'm sorry, you can't have it. And he did get off, because we also politely asked him to get off. And so it's about teaching them the tools, communication most of the time, that they need to manage that emotion.
And I think that's the most important thing, I think, from this podcast, is to remember when things go wrong, which they do, calm, reground, recenter, and then from there, repeat the scenario, return to the situation to allow for a correct learning environment.
Correct.
To allow for the neurons, the synapses to connect correctly, so they are learning how to do the correct response. Yeah. So they're learning how to regulate correctly. Yeah. And a lot of the time, especially for kids, 90% of the time it's to do with disappointment. Some form of disappointment. I want and doesn't get what I want.
Yeah.
And that's something we all need to learn, because we don't always get what we want. And that is the fundamental thing to understand, is that in life, things are going to go wrong. Kids are going to want something they can't have. And that's when the tantrums are going to happen. So be wise, be prepared, preempt.
And we have some really great resources on this that we will have available on our website and on our Instagram of how you can teach your child to accept being told no when they can't have something, and also how you can help them in transitions, because things like leaving a park or leaving a play center can be really tough for children when it's time to leave. So we've got some great resources for free for you.
Yep.
You just have to go to our website or our Instagram to get them.
So just a fun challenge for you today. Challenge to try 5 minutes of fun movement with your child, whether it's jumping, stretching, or trying to walk like an animal, or some form of silly rumble tumble type play. Record it, tag us in your stories with it, hashtag move with emotion. And just enjoy having fun with your kids, because that kind of is extremely important as well as part of developing well-rounded children.